Imagine waking up tomorrow morning, walking outside, and seeing a magnificent arc of shimmering ice and rock stretching across the entire sky, casting shadows that dance across your neighborhood like celestial clockwork. What if I told you that Earth once had the chance to form rings like Saturn, and if it had, your entire existence would be radically different from the moment you opened your eyes each morning? Welcome to a complete day in the life on a ringed Earth, where everything from your morning coffee to international politics would be transformed by this cosmic crown hovering above our heads. Let's start your day at sunrise, and trust me, you've never seen a sunrise like this. It's 6 in the morning in New York City, and instead of the familiar orange glow creeping over the horizon, the sky erupts in a spectacular light show. The rings, composed of billions of ice particles and rocky debris orbiting at 23,000 miles above the equator, catch the first rays of sunlight and ignite like a bridge of fire stretching from horizon to horizon. People living near the equator, in places like Quito, Ecuador, or Nairobi, Kenya, would see the rings edge on, appearing as a thin, brilliant line cutting the sky in half, while those in mid-latitudes like New York would witness them as a magnificent arch. The rings would be about 10 times wider than Saturn's in proportion to Earth's size, creating a jaw-dropping celestial highway that ancient civilizations would have built entire religions around. Your morning commute becomes an exercise in celestial navigation. Throughout history, sailors used stars to guide their ships, but on ringed Earth, the rings themselves would serve as a perfect compass. The rings always align with Earth's equator, so if you can see them, you instantly know which direction is north and south. Traffic apps wouldn't just show road conditions, they'd include ring shadow forecasts. Yes, shadow forecasts. Because here's where things get really interesting. Those magnificent rings cast enormous shadows on Earth's surface, and depending on the season and your latitude, you might spend several hours each day in what scientists call ring shadow. During your morning drive through Boston, you might pass from brilliant sunlight into an eerie twilight as you enter the ring shadow zone, watching the temperature drop by 10 to 15 degrees Fahrenheit within minutes. Your car's automatic headlights would flicker on, streetlights would activate, and you'd experience a mini sunset in the middle of morning rush hour. Let's talk about what this does to climate, because this is where ringed Earth becomes a completely different planet. The ring shadows don't just create cool Instagram moments, they fundamentally alter how energy from the sun reaches different parts of Earth. Regions near the equator would experience regular periods of reduced sunlight, especially during the equinoxes when the rings cast their maximum shadow. Scientists estimate that equatorial zones could lose up to 15% of their annual solar energy input. This means the Amazon rainforest might be a temperate forest instead. The Sahara Desert could receive enough shadow relief to support more vegetation. Monsoon patterns in India and Southeast Asia would shift dramatically because the temperature differentials that drive these massive weather systems would be completely different. Agriculture across the entire tropical belt would have evolved around ring shadow cycles, with farmers planting shadow-resistant crops and timing harvests to the predictable patterns of darkness. By mid-morning, you're at work, and here's something wild to consider. Every video call, every satellite transmission, every GPS coordinate would have to account for ring interference. Those billions of particles orbiting Earth would create a debris field that makes our current space junk problem look trivial. Satellites would need to orbit either well inside the rings or far outside them, creating two distinct bands of operational space. The International Space Station wouldn't exist as we know it because its orbital path would constantly intersect with ring material. Space agencies would have developed entirely different technologies, possibly focusing more on high-altitude balloons or aircraft that fly beneath the rings for Earth observation. Your smartphone's GPS might have a ring interference warning, and international flights would follow routes specifically designed to avoid the densest ring regions for communication purposes. Lunchtime arrives, and you decide to eat outside. If you're in Singapore, directly on the equator, you'd look straight up and see the rings edge on, a thin, bright line bisecting the sky like someone drew a laser pointer from horizon to horizon. The view would change throughout the year as Earth tilts on its axis. During the summer solstice in the northern hemisphere, people in Alaska would see the rings in full glory, lit up by the midnight sun, while Antarctica would see them from below, backlit and dark. 6 months later, the view would reverse. This celestial choreography would make astronomy humanity's first science. Ancient astronomers wouldn't have needed telescopes to make sophisticated calculations about Earth's tilt, orbit, and the nature of celestial mechanics. The rings would be an obvious, undeniable proof that Earth moves through space. The afternoon brings us to one of the most profound impacts, tides. Our moon creates tides by pulling on Earth's oceans, but rings would add an entirely new dynamic. While the rings themselves are relatively low mass compared to the moon, their gravitational influence would still create subtle but measurable effects on ocean levels, particularly along the equator. More significantly, the rings would affect how the moon's gravity is distributed. Some scientists theorize that rings massive enough might actually stabilize Earth's axial tilt even more than the moon already does, preventing the wild climate swings that planets without large moons experience. Coastal cities would have evolved with different tide tables, and maritime cultures would have developed navigation techniques that account for both lunar and ring-influenced water movements. As the workday ends and evening approaches, the cultural impact of rings becomes most apparent. Every religion, every mythology, every ancient culture would have the rings at the center of their cosmology. The ancient Egyptians wouldn't have worshipped the sun alone. They'd have entire pantheons dedicated to the celestial bridge. Greek philosophers would have debated whether the rings were solid crystal spheres or divine pathways. Indigenous cultures across the Americas, living with perfect equatorial views, would have creation stories about the sky bridge connecting Earth to the heavens. Modern culture would be equally obsessed. The rings would appear in every country's flag, every corporate logo, every artistic movement throughout history. Imagine the Renaissance painters capturing ring-lit landscapes, or Impressionists studying how ring shadows create entirely new color palettes at different times of day. Dinner time in Tokyo, and you're watching the news. International relations on ringed Earth would have an extra dimension, literally. Countries along the equator would have the most spectacular views, but also the most ring shadow interference. This might have made equatorial regions less desirable for certain technologies, possibly shifting the centers of industrial power toward mid-latitude regions. Conversely, the equator might be considered sacred ground, the place where humans can stand directly beneath the cosmic bridge. Border disputes wouldn't just be about land and resources, but about ring viewing rights. Environmental treaties would include provisions about space debris that might add to the rings, and there'd be intense international debate about whether humanity should ever attempt to mine the rings for resources or leave them pristine. As night falls and you prepare for bed, the rings create one final spectacular show. Unlike Saturn's rings, which are only visible from one hemisphere of that planet, Earth's rings would be visible from most locations, weather permitting. The night sky would never be truly dark for much of the planet. The rings would reflect sunlight even at midnight, creating a phenomenon called ring shine. Imagine a soft, ethereal glow arcing across the sky, bright enough to read by in some locations. Astronomers would face challenges studying distant stars and galaxies because the ring shine would create constant light pollution. But they'd also have unprecedented opportunities to study ring dynamics, particle physics, and orbital mechanics right above their heads. Romantic couples wouldn't just watch the moon, they'd take evening walks under the rings. Poets would write about the silver arch, the celestial bridge, the crown of Earth. Before you fall asleep, consider this. Rings aren't permanent. Saturn's rings might only be 100 million years old and could disappear in another 100 million years. Earth's rings, if they had formed, might have come from a captured asteroid or moon that ventured too close and was torn apart by tidal forces. Over millions of years, these rings would slowly spiral inward, creating spectacular meteor showers as ring material entered the atmosphere. Ancient humans might have witnessed chunks of ring falling as shooting stars, collecting ring fragments as sacred objects. Eventually, the rings would disappear entirely, and future generations would look at the empty sky, reading ancient texts about the celestial bridge and wondering if their ancestors had imagined it all, until scientists found ring particle residue in ancient rock layers and confirmed that yes, Earth once wore a crown. So as you drift off to sleep in this alternate reality, the rings continue their eternal dance overhead, a reminder that we live on a dynamic planet in a universe full of wonder. Every aspect of life, from the crops we grow to the gods we worship, from the technology we build to the borders we draw, would be fundamentally shaped by those magnificent arcs of ice and stone. Earth's rings would be more than just a pretty sight. They'd be woven into the very fabric of what it means to be human on this particular planet. And that's what a complete day in the life would look like if Earth had Saturn's rings.